2 years ago, we had been working on building our business, and I sold my business and walked away from a projected income of $1 million a year. Worked my whole life to be able to get up to this, and I walked away from $1 million a year income to run for U.S. Congress. Yes, to go work in the cesspool of corruption known as Washington, D.C. The reason is my daughter's future is more important than any amount of money that I could make. So I have no choice. The way I look at it, from what I understand and what I know, for me not to tell people what is really going on would be a disgrace to my daughter's future, is the way I'm looking at it. So where do we go, or how do we get here? This is kind of what I want to get into today, and I think we've got about 30 minutes if I'm not mistaken. Okay. First of all, I want to start with the Constitution. You know, this piece of paper that has been forgotten, completely forgotten nowadays. When you watch Congress, what the laws are making and everything else, it's totally, now there's a reason why, and that's what I want to get into, but I do need to spend a couple minutes. How many of you guys know what kind of government we have? Out of that pickup there, how many think we have a democracy? Okay, and I kind of want to take a quick second and just explain this. A monarchy basically means one person rules the nation. Monarchies are always an oligarchy. An oligarchy is a group of people. So technically a monarchy is not a type of government. When we look at an anarchy, that means no government. That's also a bad thing because we don't have any freedom as an anarchy, because we have to spend all of our time guarding everything we have and protecting what we have, because there is no law. So we look at a democracy, which is a temporary government. Temporary government. So every time you watch TV and you hear them spreading democracy throughout the Middle East, I want you to think that they're spreading temporary governments, because every temporary government eventually falls to anarchy and eventually becomes ruled by an oligarchy. Throughout history, that is exactly it. Look at Rome and some of the other countries out there. What we are is a republic, a constitutional republic. Just to give you a quick breakdown of the difference between a republic and a democracy. If a group of people wanted to take my child away from me in a democracy, it's majority rules. They can take my child from me. Whereas in a republic, the law says they cannot do it, and regardless of the number of people, they cannot touch my child, because the law actually protects us. Just a quick sentence. So when we start looking at things like in Rome, Germany, Italy, and Russia, all these experienced democracy. Rome actually had the first republic, and the people of the country or the state of Rome basically got lazy, and they let the politicians take over. And once the politicians took over, they eventually moved into a democracy, then it went into an anarchy, and then back to anarchy, right back to the oligarchy. So that's how that first republic actually fell. And it kind of sounds like what we're doing in the United States, is it not? We've gotten lazy. We don't pay attention to what's really going on. So now we're losing our country. Washington has taken over, and I'm going to explain how this actually works. You know, when Ben Franklin was asked after he came out of the convention, what kind of government do we have? He said basically, a republic, if you can keep it. And the republic keeping it now is something we are not doing. We are losing our republic. We've got the Patriot Act, the definite detention of American citizens going on. Yes, Congress voted for this. Indefinite detention of American citizens. The EPA, the BLM, the IRS, all stealing all of our private property. Because understand the Communist Manifesto, one of the main rules of the Communist Manifesto is abolition of private property. This is exactly where we're going. The judicial branch, the executive branch are making laws. Well, the executive branch writing executive orders. Where is that allotted in the Constitution? It's supposed to be a balance of power. It's not. Centralized control of education, healthcare, everything else. Doesn't that sound a bit like socialism? Taxes, taxes, and more taxes. And wait till you hear where our taxes actually go, which I'll be happy to explain those in a minute. So are we giving up our security for freedom? Vice versa? Those give, Benjamin Franklin, of course, had his quote. Actually, I had to go back to Ben again, because he had a lot of quotes throughout the years. And so what is the actual foundation of corruption? It actually breaks down into 3 different things. Number 1 is education and information. Number 2 is jurisdiction. And number 3, lo and behold, is money. Money, gold. You know, real money, gold. When we're looking at education, you have to go back to 1902. The Board of Education was started by Rockefeller, who had this statement. And then, of course, you follow up with Hitler, what Hitler did. If you take control of the youth, you take control of the entire generation. This is where we're at today. My daughter had history class last year, and we had her in I'm just going to say a local school because I don't want to get her. I had to block out her teacher's name, so I didn't ask permission. Went to history class, and I made her bring her history book home. She brought her history book home, and I said, I want to read it. She goes, oh, Dad, do you have to? And I said, yes. And I went through the entire history book with Post-it notes, and I put Post-it notes everywhere the history was wrong in her history book. I said, now take this back to your teacher, and he and I need to have a conference. She took it back to the teacher, and he goes, your dad's absolutely right, and I voted for him in the last election. So she goes, well, if you're teaching this, why do I have to learn this? He says, that's the curriculum. I have to teach you the curriculum out of New York City. So the history being taught to our children today is wrong. I can promise you that. It is wrong. So today I'm going to try to correct some of this. And eventually our education is going to drop down to the 3 R's of education: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And this is kind of where we're going to be at as the education continues to fall. Adult education is based basically on what we watch on TV. Well, in 1983, there were 50 different agencies that actually gave us the news. Today, as of 2011, there's 6. 6. These are the 6 that we have to deal with. GE. So all of these people get all their information from where? Either AP or Reuters. And it's interesting. I'll let you guys do a little research. Who owns those? It becomes very interesting, which ties into the gold and the Fed, which you'll have to do a lot of research. I've got about 5 years just breaking that down, and the spider chart looks crazy. So again, back to Hitler. If you tell a lie big enough and tell it often enough, people actually believe it. And that's what's happening today. So the Florida Appeals Court, I don't know if you guys can read this or not, but I kind of threw it up there, actually stated that it's not illegal to tell lies from the media. This is a court case in the state of Florida. So that kind of throws it out there. It's like they're allowed to say anything they want to, and it's not illegal, according to this court case in the state of Florida, which most of us live, I guess. So just because it's on TV, it doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. We want to do our diligent research because a lot of stuff on the internet is very wrong. A lot of misinformation, disinformation we run across. But what I always found out is every little thing out there has a little tiny morsel of truth. But it takes so long to find that morsel of truth, and you got to break that down. It's 10 years of research I've been doing this, and not many people have that kind of time. I know Ron doesn't exactly have all that time. So anyways, learn what your child is learning and see what it is. I bought a 100-year-old textbook, U.S. history book. I found at a, what was the little antiquing? She likes to do the antiquing thing. So I found a history book, and I started reading the 1889 history book, which is completely different than the history we learn today. And that's the history book from back then. It wasn't published from New York State. So the second problem we have under education and information is jurisdiction. This is probably the most complex things to understand in the world today. So I have to give you a little bit of history, a little bit of background on this because I was on TV answering a few questions in the last election, and the questions were so uneducated I didn't know how to answer them. I'd have to give a 30-minute history lesson just to teach them how to ask the question so I could properly answer it. It was that bad. So according to our founders, of course, the government was supposed to leave the people alone. That's what made the United States great. The government got out of the way. They have 17 enumerated powers. That's it. The states created the federal government. Why is it the states are now subservient to the federal government?
Because people don't know their history.
That's definitely where we're going. So March 12th, 1819, the first, how many of you guys know there's 2 13th Amendments? Do you know the first 13th Amendment wasn't even freeing the slaves? It was titles of nobility. The name Esquire, which is reporting directly to the Queen of England, or in other words, every attorney in the United States on the Bar Association would not be allowed to run for U.S. Congress or any position within the government with the titles of nobility. Clause put in the 13th Amendment. So what happened? It basically disappeared because we went into the Civil War, and then of course some certain things got enacted. Back the Civil War ended, generally surrendered and so forth. The southern states were restored and reseated in Congress. The new 13th Amendment came out, which freed the slaves. Well, ironically enough, the 7 states in the South voted to free slavery, which is great. But keep that in mind when we look at this next slide. What happened to 13th? Well, that one just kind of vanished during the Reconstruction Acts. It's there. You can still find the documents. You just got to find it on the Maine's state constitution and several other constitutions. And also, I think I listed in there with the Senate registry. You can actually find it in there. It's there. It's just nobody follows it anymore. It's just not part of our Constitution. So the question is why? So the 14th Amendment changed everything. The 14th Amendment created another citizenship. Because remember, before the 14th Amendment, before the Civil War, all of us were all state citizens. We're all our state citizens. There was no federal citizenship at all. Matter of fact, there's nothing in the Constitution that authorizes federal citizenship. So to get around that, they created the 14th Amendment. Well, interestingly enough, these states voted against the 14th Amendment, all of them. But ironically, all those states highlighted voted for the 13th. So what happened is Congress passed these Reconstruction Acts. The 10 states went under military law, martial law. They took the state legislators and threw them out and replaced them with their own, changed the constitution of the states, elected new suitable legislators, and ratified the 14th Amendment and shoved it through. It even passed over Andrew Jackson's veto on top of that. So this was shoved down our throat for a specific reason. So when we look at certain things like, no state shall ever deprive any person of life, liberty, and property without due process, sounds great, except up here, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States, not of their state. So this statement actually forbids the states from interfering with federal citizenship. So the validity of the public, the debt is now carried because we're still paying the interest on the money borrowed from the Civil War. And because of the 14th Amendment and the Section 4 of it, we can't even argue it. We can't even argue it. And it actually gets worse. Slaves were never been free. And those guys know me, I call it as it is, I don't pull punches. Never been free. You moved from, your great ancestors moved from being a slave over to the federal jurisdiction. So your ownership basically changed. Well, it gets better because we all voluntarily went to that system. As we go through this, Clause 34 of the Act of 1871 actually specifically adopts the United States Constitution as their municipal law. Now what that means is they can change the municipal law with statutes and codes for federal citizens. We now fall under the jurisdiction of the District of Columbia, not the Constitution of the United States. We lost the 13th Amendment. Now we have attorneys that were started out, and the Bar Association started, as soon as this was all clear, they started the Bar Association. That Bar Association now enforces the law for the District of Columbia, not the Constitution of the United States. The difference being you have the state of Florida, and many of you have already seen your driver's license and everything. They're always in what? All capital letters? That tells you which jurisdiction you're actually living in. Everything in all capital letters falls under the jurisdiction of the District of Columbia, not the Constitution of the United States, because you have personally elected to be a federal citizen. So Black's Law Dictionary, kind of cut out there in the bottom there, but I pulled this out in 1999, the 7th edition. The Supreme Court agrees with everything in the Bill of Rights except the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Seventh, and the Eighth Amendments, which are no longer enforced by the jurisdiction of the District of Columbia, from which all of we fall under. So as you see these laws starting to pass, you start to understand why the freedom of religion and freedom of speech is being breached consistently. There's this big fight about the Second Amendment and protecting the rights. Well, if we don't have a Second Amendment, we're not going to have any amendments. We've got to have a Second Amendment. So real quick, what do you call 10,000 attorneys at the bottom of the ocean? Everybody remember this one? A good start, yes. Now you see why. So what Supreme Court rulings came out? And for you attorneys, I apologize, but it is what it is. So sorry, I call it as it is. I'm not going to pull punches. So where is this stated at? You have these different Supreme Court choices out here that are rulings that have came out. And I put a couple of them up here. There's about 15 to 20 of them that I pulled up. I just took out the top 3 just to give you an idea of where they came from and where I'm speaking from. So this is actually reinforced by our own Supreme Court. th Amendment popped out. What happened with the 17th Amendment? Anybody remember that?
Senators popular vote.
Popular vote. So states lost representation in Washington with the 17th Amendment because it now allowed people to vote publicly. Well, we already voted those people into office when we voted for the state representation. So now the only people that get into Congress is people that can afford to spend $10 million. I don't know about how many of you guys got $10 million to throw to run for Congress? I dropped $250,000 in 2014 to run for Congress. There's no way in the world I could come up with $10 million. So who has that kind of money? Major corporations. Now major corporations have representation in Congress and the states do not. That is exactly what happened on the 17th Amendment. Roosevelt, his New Deal came out, 1933, the major gold seizure. Anybody realize that all the golds got seized in the United States in 1933? The bailout of the Federal Reserve Bank is exactly what it is, and they basically stole over 50% of the wealth of the American people overnight. They stole all the gold and they depreciated the dollar immediately. So the New Deal was a series of programs enacted by Roosevelt, which essentially says, here's the deal. The United States went bankrupt March 9, 1933. The New Deal is, if you give up your God-given rights, guaranteed by the Constitution, in exchange for civil rights and the benefits of the federal zone, you now can be a federal citizen. So everybody, not everybody, the majority of Americans actually voluntarily agreed to give away their God-given rights under the Constitution to become a federal citizen with the wonderful benefits of us donating our money to the federal government, to Social Security and everything else, and them spending it all. So this is where we're at today. We are in what they call the federal zone. The state of Florida is underneath the federal zone. The state is actually here. The land is still here. But now we're under the jurisdiction of the District of Columbia, not the Constitution of the United States. Brandeis rules came out. 1936. He was a judge on the Supreme Court. If you live in the federal zone and you're taking benefits, this is what rule number 6 said. If you're taking benefits from the federal zone, you cannot argue any constitutionality. You cannot argue the Constitution as your right because you're taking federal benefits and you voluntarily became a federal citizen. It makes it extremely hard to challenge anything, and you have to jump through hoops. I have a friend who happens to be a citizen of the state of California. He's a foreigner in the United States. He actually is one of the only people I've ever met that is a true state citizen. And he also came up with this definition called a patriot. We call them patriots. These are the guys like Wesley Snipes and the guys who are in the federal zone, taking the benefits from the federal zone, and they think they don't have to pay taxes. If you're in the federal zone and you're a federal citizen, you must pay the IRS. That is your contract with them. You sign your W-2 as an agreement to pay those taxes. Only state citizens can voluntarily pay the taxes. Federal citizens must pay them because that's part of your deal with the federal zone and getting all the benefits. So where do all our tax dollars go anyways? Ronald Reagan, best thing he ever did the entire time he was in office was he commissioned something called the Grace Commission Report. Where did all our dollars go? Well, we found out exactly with the Grace Commission Report. Last 2 years ago, I had signs out that said, in the IRS. And everybody's asking me, well, how are you going to finance the government if you're in the IRS? Well, none of our money that we pay goes to the federal government. It goes to pay the interest on the money borrowed from the Federal Reserve. Period. That's where all of our money goes. And if you think back, in 1984, all the money went there, and we were only a little over $1 trillion in debt. Today, after this new budget that Obama's going to put in, we're over $21 trillion in debt, which does not concern fractional reserve banking, for those of you guys that understand modern money mechanics, which is 10 times that amount. In addition to that, you have Social Security, Medicare, unfunded liabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, we're over $300 trillion in debt. What do you think the chances are we're going to pay it off, considering there's not that much money in the world? Here's the other issue. Every dollar created in the United States is created only at the time of a loan. When you go to the bank to borrow money to get a car, bank doesn't have the money. It's fractional reserve banking. They create the money from thin air and loan it to you. When you don't make your car payment, guess what? They get your car, but they have no value in that car whatsoever. So if we were to actually pay off all the loans in the United States, there would be no money in existence. I think gold's kind of important. What do you think? Yeah, so how do we finance the government now? It's called inflation. Every time they print money, your bank account is worth less. So if you have $10,000 saved in your bank account for retirement, $100,000, and they go out and print, I don't know, another $2 trillion or whatever they're going to print out now with the Fed, your bank account just went down the value. The prices actually don't go up, the dollar goes down. I think I went the wrong way there, didn't I? So the third foundation then moves right into money. Money is what we're talking about when we're talking about gold. That's actual money. And I like the little 1 gram outlets that the Carrot Bar has, because it's something that's easy to move around and keep change with, because that's been an issue. If I wasn't buying that, I would only buy gold that's on a coin from 1933 or before, when it used to be real money. So the Fed, of course, I spent a lot of time talking about that in 2014, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Fed. I think most of you guys are kind of aware that the Fed's probably not on our side, and not getting into the creature of Jekyll Island or anything else. But it is a mathematical impossibility to ever pay off these loans with our current monetary system. Obviously, the reason why politicians like it is because they get unlimited funds for re-election. The political parties, even though I'm running Republican at the top level, are controlled by money. They're controlled by money. When I run for office, they're going to pick somebody here locally, and they're going to dump hundreds of thousands of dollars in their accounts to run against me. Because if I win, and we discuss this to the open public, this is going to be a bad thing for the system. Not for us. It would get our freedom to come back in. So, question, can you still buy a gallon of gas for a quarter today? Yes.
Yes.
As long as it's a 1964 quarter or older, you can buy 2 gallons of gas now. So, yeah, so the problem is not with the money. The prices aren't going up, the dollar's going down, because that still is worth $3.50 today. So it buys more than it would buy a gallon of diesel and some, right? So anyways, quantitative easing is what's destroying it. The politicians receive this money and to get their political promises covered. You get the idea that we're not raising taxes. But this whole government is funded through inflation. Every time you go to the grocery store, remember how $100 used to fill up your cart? And tell you get what, 5 or 6 items in there now? Okay, that is how they're funding the government. That's inflation. The dollar is going down. It's a theft from the American people. This is the way we look today. The people are at the bottom. You have the state, the Fed, you've got Agenda 21 that we've got to get into. Well, we're not going to do today. You've got regionalism, stakeholders, campaign finance. Isn't that interesting? Campaign finance. They determine the policies. The counties are to enforce those policies. This is called governance, not government. Today, this is what we actually look like. You have the international bankers since 1913, the 16th, 17th Amendment, obviously the Federal Reserve Act coming in. That's all central planning. Runs down to the policy, the county, enforcement, regional plans. The people are now at the bottom. So what do we need to do is we need to go back to what made us a great country, which it's not what the government did, it's what they didn't do. They allowed us to live our lives with the 17 enumerated powers, and they serve the states and the people. We don't serve the federal government. They serve the states and the people. We want to go back to the freedom for the individual, freedom of work, and most importantly, on the very bottom down there, keep the fruits of your labors. That's what we were supposed to do. We're not supposed to pay payroll taxes. Even the 16th Amendment didn't allot payroll taxes. It didn't give the federal government new taxing powers, and that's been quoted in several different Supreme Court rulings. So if they didn't have it beforehand, they don't have it after. How are they doing it now? And that's where we get into the whole jurisdiction issue. You're now a federal citizen and you're signing the agreement to become that. Can we restore the republic? Yes, we can. We absolutely can, but it's going to take well-informed people to understand some of this. How many of you guys knew this stuff before coming in today? Good, good. So it's going to take more people to understand, because if you're going to make some changes, we all can't just go one at a time to be a state citizen. You can't function in the world today as a state citizen unless you're a lawyer and you can balance all those hats. We need to move together, and that's going to deal with a lot of different things with constitutional sheriffs. County commissioners are actually honest, and a good school board. This is where we're going to have to actually get involved at on the lower levels, because in order to take back Washington, you got to have somebody on that side of the fence fighting that understands this, but you need to have the counties taking control, and it all starts with your constitutional sheriff that you bring in. If he's not a constitutional sheriff, you're in trouble. And the problem you got with constitutional sheriffs is they split their jurisdiction. They sign an oath to the Constitution, and they sign a W-2 as an oath to the federal zone. So they're stuck. So as long as they're getting their money from the federal zone, they're going to follow the federal zone. So what we need to be able to do is, what I've been doing for years, is developing small businesses, the backbone of the country, and we support our own sheriff's department by funding it with our income and building small business. Wasn't that the backbone of the country, small business? Yeah, so we need your help. I want to say a special thanks for Ron and Eddie and Rob for having out here today, and we do need your help. I can't say anything about campaigning as far as the slides go, but you can talk to my wife Laura. We would appreciate some signatures if you want to jump in and get involved with that and helping us. I would certainly appreciate it. I put $250,000 of my own money in it last time. I can't afford to do that again, but anything you can do to help, we appreciate it. And I want to thank you guys for coming in. If you guys want some good reading material, if you want to copy the presentation, let me know. And this is some basic reading material if you want to look into any further and do the research on it. Congressman, I'll take it. Thank you.